Good morning, everyone. Welcome to Collector Cave. Thank you for watching this little video. Just wanted to kind of jump in here and give you a little update on the Ghost Rider figure that I got from Sideshow Toys. So as you guys probably saw, or it seems a lot of you have seen from my previous video, unfortunately, it was not what I expected. And so I contacted Sideshow customer service. They were really nice. I'm getting a refund on the figure. And it's kind of unfortunate. Normally, I guess they would try to send out a replacement. However, for one, it's a limited run figure. So there's only 350 pieces made. And, you know, disappointingly enough, from what the customer service rep said, they did take a look at some of the other figures in the run, a few samples that they had, and it seems that the problems in that particular figure are very common. And they felt that rather than giving me a replacement figure, I would find the same issues, so they're going to offer me a refund. That being said, I think it's a little disappointing. For one, they didn't really kind of, the person I talked to over the phone was different than the department that actually handles these particular issues. But for one thing, it took like 20 minutes to get a hold of somebody on the phone. The person I spoke to was very nice. The person that emailed me wasn't really that apologetic about the issues with the figure. Didn't really offer me any incentive to order something else. They just said they'd give me a refund. And I had asked, hook me up with a little something to, kind of make it right. I mean, it's a $225 figure. You have a certain expectation of quality. Now, that is my first Sideshow Toys manufactured 1/6 scale figure. I do have one or two Hot Toys figures in my actually, I have 3 Hot Toys figures currently in my collection. I have the Empire Strikes Back edition Darth Vader figure, which is a magnificent piece. I have my holy grail of figures, my Christopher Reeve Superman the movie Hot Toys figure. One of these days I'm going to get my hands on the evil version. Just have to have $350 to spend on that, which, $225 on Sideshow. I go up another $100 and I've got my Superman, so maybe I'll do that instead. But I also now have the Amazing Spider-Man Hot Toys figure from the first Amazing Spider-Man movie, Andrew Garfield version, not Tobey Maguire or anything like that. And that's actually a really nice piece, I gotta say. Interestingly enough, I'm really starting to enjoy the Hot Toys pieces and appreciate them in a different way. I kind of, I collect my current line of choice is Mezco 112 scale figures. Most of them are really nice pieces, really nice figures. I have to say this year's releases are a little less impressive than last year's releases. I don't know, something about them, the body styles, the plastic, they seem to have gotten a little lighter. There seems to be a lot more recurring issues of breakage. A little unfortunate, but all in all, wonderful line of figures if you're going to collect figures like that. I can't recommend them highly enough. I personally am not a huge collector of Mafex series figures, Figuarts figures, Figma figures. I just haven't really gotten into that. Me personally, I'd rather go for something I'm really crazy about, which is the Mezco figures, and spend $85 on that than $65 on a Figuarts figure. But that's just me. Figuarts does some really great pieces. If you are already collecting them, then obviously and they do a really nice job with certain things. Articulation, they do a great job with articulation. However, in my opinion, I think they fall short on the aesthetic of the figure where it comes to articulation and the way they integrate the joints with the body. Just those ball joints just sort of look a little awkward in certain cases, depending on the type of figure. So, that's just really a case-by-case basis. But all in all, they're really great pieces to own if you're into collecting those. And their price points are pretty steady. They don't vary too much. Most of them are between $60 and $75. And it just depends on the scale, the size of the figure, the amount of plastic that goes into it. So they're a decent line. I'm personally just not into them. That's just not my thing. That's just me. I do enjoy Marvel Legends. I have quite a collection of Marvel Legends figures. I've had it kind of dwindle over the years, gotten rid of a lot of stuff that I just don't really care about anymore. But back in the day when Marvel Legends first came out, I was probably, at least for Toy Biz waves, I would get pretty much every single wave. Build-A-Figures and all, and then after a while it got a little crazy, so I stopped getting every single figure and just stuck to the ones I really liked. But I had, the Mojo Bath, I had Sentinels, I had Galactus, I had, I had MODOK, I had, most of the Toy Biz Build-A-Figure collections. And I just, I've sold them off over time, given them away to people, stuff like that. I kind of, I've always loved toys, always loved action figures. So these videos are really fun to make and talk about them and have a forum to do that. It's nice, nice to meet people with the same hobby and interest that you have. And that's what's great about being able to post this stuff and all the little gadgets and technology that we have at our disposal, is you can connect with more people than you ever thought you could who share interests, and you have a good time talking about stuff like this. So, and one big line for me was DC Universe Classics. That was probably, I'd say, if you were to compare Marvel Legends versus DC Universe Classics, I would have to say that was my number one line for the majority of the late, mid to late 2000s, into the teens, just because I had, they really brought back the nostalgia and the love for the DC superheroes, the Superpowers figures. Now, the Superpowers figures is probably my all-time favorite toy line. I love the Marvel Superheroes line. That was a great line. I loved that as a kid. But there was something so special and unique about the DC Superpowers line of figures. They didn't do it right in the beginning. Unfortunately, Kenner shot their wad on Series 2, and then they threw out Series 3, and they had a whole bunch of line plans to expand into different characters at that point in time, and just didn't work out for them. They weren't performing as well as they had hoped. But therein lies the problem. They had come out with too many obscure characters in the line. So rather than expand on the core characters, they were pulling a lot from Super Friends and characters like that were a little bit more obscure, not as widely known. So people looked at them like, who's Samurai? Who's this guy? It was, and ironically, he's a very valuable figure now, but at least if you find him in the package. It's just the DC Universe Classics figures, for one, Mattel outsourced the sculpting for the figures. They didn't do it in-house. They didn't have, designers from Mattel doing it. What they did was they outsourced it to Four Horsemen. And Four Horsemen, if you guys are familiar with Four Horsemen, which you probably are, Four Horsemen was an amazing, amazing company. And they still are. And unfortunately, they don't seem to be out there as much, or at least it's not as obvious that they are. I haven't really noticed anything that really has their hallmark design and figure aesthetic to them that's out on the open market anyway. But with the Universe Classics figures, man, they came in and they started off with the DC superheroes, and no, that's not true. They started off with the Batman line. They first came in for Mattel doing a Batman line of figures, and this was when, I guess, from making that bridge, jumping the gun from Kenner and Galoob to then Hasbro had it for a little while, and then they went over to Mattel as the master toy licensor for DC Comics. So once they got their hands on those, then they started plotting out their Batman lines. And when they did that, they had Four Horsemen do the sculpting and the design of the figure itself. Those were just really nice figures. I have a Batman from that series. I have a Killer Croc from that series. I had a Joker. I don't know where it went. But, those figures were just magnificent. I mean, the articulation was very limited, but here's what was great about Four Horsemen. They continued, there was like 3 series of those Batman figures, and then they stopped the series of Batman, and then what they did was they started DC Superheroes. They got the license again to do all of the DC characters they could. So when they did the DC Superheroes figures, they then really started to experiment with the articulation and the sculpting of the figures themselves. So it was one of those things where, well, Toy Biz, they changed over time. They experimented, they added joints, they got much better at their sculpting and their figure designs as they got later on in their run. But I think that the DC Superheroes line and the DC Universe Classics line really adapted a lot faster to the collector community as far as how they built their figures. And, to be honest, I cannot, and I got most of those figures, I cannot recall an instance of damage or breakage on more than a small handful of figures in that entire line. And then if you contacted Mattel and they had a replacement, they would send it out to you. They give you a voucher to pick up another one. And you could find them eventually. They weren't that rare that you couldn't eventually get your hands on one. But, there were once in a while you had some issues with a figure, but nothing major and really very rare, at least in my opinion, and based on my own personal experiences. I think I maybe had like 2 figures break. And that was because the leg joints were very loose, and in one case they were stuck. So that was early in the line. As they got later on in the line, the quality control got much better. That was one thing Mattel was really good at, was their quality control. So just that particular line is probably one of the best modern figure lines, in my opinion, that they've ever made, to this day still. And the reason for that, in my opinion, again, is because, once again, Four Horsemen doing the sculpting, what they did was they started to adapt, they started to modify their sculpts. Some figures weren't sculpted that great. I mean, they recycled the Superman figure over and over and over again, which is really disappointing in my opinion, because Superman's my favorite, and I got really sick of seeing the same face on a different Superman body. And once they did a better face, which I think probably the best Superman face that they've done is on the long-haired Superman. They did the regular costume long-haired version and the black suited Superman, and that's probably the best Superman face sculpt. And it's a shame they couldn't just retool it to put it on later figures and just fix the hair so that he gave him the short hair but with the same face. Because, Superman's face is a little derpy, I gotta say. So it's really the only area that really falls short for me, is it's a little derpy. But basically, when it comes to Superman, when it comes to all these different figures, the Batman characters were just top notch. I remember when that first line of DC Universe Classics figures came out, and I looked at that line, I'm like, holy cow, look at that. That is a beautiful sculpt. And the reason for that, I think, is they really tried to give it a comic book page to 3-dimensional figure appeal. They really tried to adhere to the comic book styling, the comic book, the overall comic book nature of its source material. And, all the different versions of the figures they tried to really adhere to that. And I loved it, absolutely loved it, when they did the superpowers homage periodically throughout the line, or pulled a character from the superpowers line to do in the main line of figures, like Brainiac. I mean, one of their best figures is that Brainiac for DC Universe Classics. So, and also the Penguin is great. Mr. Freeze was great. Who else? Oh gosh. I mean, that first line overall, I'd say, like, it took them, the Metamorpho Build-A-Figure was not the best. It was a very weak Build-A-Figure, and I had gotten my hands on a few, and he just did not want to stay together. But they figured it out. They got better at it, and eventually they were making some of the best Build-A-Figures that you've ever seen. Apache Chief and Bane and Darkseid and Calabac and Gorilla Grodd and Solomon Grundy, that chemo character, that giant one. That was probably the biggest one that they did. Those Build-A-Figures were really magnificent, just outstanding. So, I always kind of compare new stuff to those, because one thing that I was always proud of was the way they did the articulation. A lot of us are seeing the Mezco figures talking about how it's articulated, what the joints are like, double jointed elbows or not double jointed elbows, stuff like that. And when you look at the DC Universe Classics figures, Four Horsemen did an amazing job designing the articulation, because in probably 3/4 of the figure line throughout its lifespan, they didn't have double jointed elbows. They didn't add that in until some of the later series, when they did the 75th anniversary line, where they started to put, like, Robin was one of the first figures. We get to remember the Tim Drake variant and the regular Robin. So that was one of the first figures that had double jointed knees and double jointed elbows. Now, they really did a fantastic job integrating the elbow and knee joints into the body, into the limbs, to make it really look seamless. Also, they put their seams on the sides or on the back. They didn't put their seams on the front, which is another unique thing that they've started to do again. And so it's clear that they're not using the same company to do the sculpting and design of the figure, because in the Multiverse line, all the seams are now on the front, and it looks bad. I don't like it. I don't like the way they've done it. And a lot of the figures, the sculpts on the faces have gotten better, but the body types are kind of goofy. So I'll leave you with that. I got to run, but thank you guys for watching. I'm going to post this video. Please like it, share, comment, subscribe, whatever you got to do. But I'd love to build a following here. Please, support that if you can, and I really appreciate it. So take care, and I will talk to you soon. Thanks. Bye.